What's up, APUSH peeps? We have America's History, the 8th edition, Chapter 6 review video for you today. If you're using a different edition, it should match up just as well. Make sure you check out the description for videos that match up with the new curriculum, including key concept videos that are specifically mentioned in the curriculum that you must know to succeed. If you want to copy this PowerPoint, head on over to APUSHreview.com to download it as well. So let's get going. Trials of War, 1776 to 1778. So we're dealing with the first 2 years of the Revolutionary War here. War in the North. Britain's military vastly outnumbered the Patriots. If you were a betting person in 1776 and somebody asked you to place a bet, who would you say would win this war? You would have picked Great Britain. Some natives also sided with the British during the war. But there begins a turning point in the war with the Battle of Saratoga in 1777. Here's a picture hanging in the Capitol Rotunda in D.C., a painting of the Battle of Saratoga. The Battle of Saratoga was a turning point, as I mentioned, because the Patriots won. But what really matters is that France intervenes on behalf of the United States, and they begin to provide aid to the U.S., both financial and military. So if you're ever writing an essay about the success, or a short answer question about the success of the Revolutionary War, why the U.S. won, absolutely include French aid. That's a huge reason for it. Women played an important role in the war effort by creating clothing, and also they would run farms when husbands were away fighting. Some women hoped to gain more rights, such as Abigail Adams. Many women hoped that this idea of freedom, this idea of ideas from the Declaration of Independence would carry over to women. We'll find out if that comes true. State currencies were highly inflated during this time. And this guy, Robert Morris, who was part of the Treasury, he secured valuable aid from Holland and France, so valuable loans. He played an important role in getting foreign aid. This guy right here, Robert Morris, know him. Valley Forge, Baron von Steuben, is another important figure in the Revolutionary War. He was a former Prussian military officer, and he helped train the American army, helped make them into a better fighting unit. So when looking at the French alliance, France and the U.S. they had an unusual alliance. Most people kind of looked at this and were like, why are these two sides together? Well, you have a Catholic monarchy in France, and then you have a good portion of the U.S. is Protestant, and they're anti-monarchy. But they formed an alliance because France hated Great Britain. Ben Franklin, this dude right down here, he plays a hugely important role in the Treaty of Alliance between the two countries. It's his diplomacy that helps reach this agreement. And in this agreement, it said that both America and France would ensure the independence of the U.S. They would not sign a treaty with Great Britain without declaring that the U.S. was independent. So let's go over to the South. In 1779, Spain joins the fight against Britain. And in the South, fewer individuals contributed to the war effort. There were many plantations and farms down there, and there's this fear of leaving slaves unattended. So if the farmers or the plantation owners went to fight, they would have less people watching over their farms at home. The Philipsburg Proclamation affected those plantations in the South, and this was a Great Britain proclamation that stated that slaves that rebelled would gain protection and freedom from Great Britain, and some slaves did take advantage of this. During the war itself, 5,000 African Americans, both free and slave, fought for the Patriot cause, so they contributed to the effort as well. Then we have this dude, the Marquis de Lafayette. And by the way, if in your city there's anything Lafayette, chances are it's named after this guy. I live in Buffalo, and there's some things in Buffalo named Lafayette after him. He was this French dude who was instrumental in gaining French troops to America. So it was his lobbying that helped the French send troops to America to help out in the war effort. He becomes a hero in the United States and is recognized all throughout the country for many years. And a lot of the fighting that took place was done guerrilla warfare style. And the Battle of Saratoga in 1781 is the last major battle of the war in which Lord Cornwallis surrenders to George Washington. So let's figure out, how the heck did the Patriots actually win? Well, probably most importantly, they had French aid. They also had the home field advantage. They knew the land better than the British did, and they were fighting for a cause that they believed in. They also had excellent leadership under people like George Washington. So the Treaty of Paris of 1783 is signed. That formally ends the war, and some things that you should know. But looking at this picture, here are some diplomats that were negotiating the Treaty of Paris. You see Ben Franklin right in the middle. And what do you know was missing? It's the British. They refused to pose for this painting. They wanted no part of it. So this painting was never finished. Britain recognized U.S. independence, and the United States gained all land east of the Mississippi. So they gained an incredible amount of land. They also gained fishing rights off of Newfoundland, and Britain could pursue their debts. The U.S. would put no obstacles up to prevent Britain from pursuing their debts. Spain and France gained very little. They hoped to get into the war to gain lots of land, but they end up gaining very little. France becomes severely in debt, and that will catch up with them in 6 years in 1789 with the French Revolution. Quite ironic that the French helped the U.S. out so much, and the American Revolution was a cause of the French Revolution. And Spain gains back Florida, so they gain very little. So let's go to Republican institutions. We're going to focus on state constitutions first. Pennsylvania had a controversial constitution. They created a unicameral or a one-house legislature that had total power. There was no governor who could veto laws or anything. When other states created bicameral legislatures or two-house legislatures, and most states were not truly democratic. It really was only Pennsylvania and Vermont. Women would seek a public voice. You have Abigail Adams, the wife of John Adams. She was famous for writing this letter to him saying, remember the ladies. And she basically was urging him and these other men, these other founding fathers, to remember to give rights to women. She hoped to end customs and laws that oppressed women, such as married women could not own property, could not have contracts, and really could not have their own separate identity from their husbands. Only white men were full citizens in the new government, so that's a select group of people. In the war's losers, loyalists, Native Americans, and slaves were all negatively affected by the war. Many loyalists suffered economically. Many of them ended up fleeing to Canada or other areas. Native Americans were pushed further and further west off their lands, and this will be a trend that we'll see throughout U.S. history. They continually move more and more west, and slaves did not gain freedom after the war. So the first government that the U.S. has is the Articles of Confederation. And this created a weak central government, and states had a lot of power. Each state had one equal vote in the national government, regardless of the size of the population of the state. And if states wanted to amend the Articles, unanimous approval was required. All 13 states had to agree. So imagine you and your 12 closest friends are deciding what to do on a Friday night. But in order to do it, all 13 of you have to agree. If 12 of you wants to go to the movies to see the new hot flick coming out, and one friend wants to go bowling, guess what you are not doing? You are not going to the movies if you play by the rules of the Articles of Confederation. The federal government could make treaties, borrow money, and ask for tax money. They did not have the power to tax, but they could basically say, hey, states, we really could use some tax money if you want to help us out. So this leads to a fiscal crisis. The U.S. was in debt, and so they began to sell Western land. And we're going to talk about the Northwest Ordinance, which is specifically mentioned in the new curriculum. I'll have a video on this soon. Slavery was banned in the Northwest Territory. This is the Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin area. Money from 1 out of the 36 square miles that were sold would go towards education. So little towns would be set up, or townships would be set up with 36 square miles, 6 by 6. The 16th square mile in this 36 square miles, all that money would go towards education. Territories could apply for statehood when they reached the minimum population of 60,000 people. So the Northwest Land Ordinance allowed territories to be admitted into the Union as states. A huge problem with the Articles of Confederation is Shays' Rebellion, or this demonstrates a major weakness. In Massachusetts, state legislatures increased taxes drastically, and many farms were foreclosed or farmers had their land taken away. So as former Revolutionary War vet Daniel Shades, he led a rebellion. And this demonstrated the weakness of the Articles because it took a very long time to put it down. And this leads many people to realize, hey, we need a new, stronger government. So we're going to go over to the Constitution now in 1787 in Philadelphia. So sectional differences begin to emerge slowly, and keep this in mind really for the next 60, 70 years. Northerners tend to favor tariffs, and Southerners did not, because in the North, that's where businesses would be. So at the Philadelphia Convention, and here is a picture. You'll probably notice a lot of these guys. You'll see George Washington here, who was elected president of the convention. Old Ben Franklin here, and somebody whispering sweet nothings into his ear down here is Alexander Hamilton. So these are really like the big three masterminds of it, plus some other people like James Madison as well. So there are 55 delegates. Most of them are wealthy and members of the upper class. And it's important to note that Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were not in attendance. They were foreign diplomats at this time, so they were not, I repeat, not at the Philadelphia Convention. So we have two plans that you should be familiar with, the Virginia and New Jersey plans. These were proposals for Congress. And the Virginia plan proposed a bicameral two-house legislature where representation in Congress was to be based on population. This would favor the large states. So small states like New Jersey were worried, so they came out with their own plan that representation should be equal for each state. Two sides are kind of stuck. And then we have the Great Compromise, known as the Connecticut Compromise, because delegates from Connecticut, including Roger Sherman, came up with this idea. So this combined elements of both the Virginia and New Jersey plans. It creates a bicameral, a two-house legislature. The lower house, or the House of Representatives, would be based on population. So that satisfies the needs of the Virginia plan. The House of Representatives would be elected directly by the people. And the upper house, the Senate, would have 2 per state. So this satisfies the small states because it's equal representation. However, senators originally were not elected by the people. They were elected by the state legislatures. It's not until the 17th Amendment that this changes. So slavery is a topic that the Founding Fathers essentially push off for another day. The 3/5 Compromise stated that 60% of slaves would count towards population for representation in Congress, and this is an advantage for the South. The only other thing that really deals with slavery is the Slave Trade Compromise, which says that the importation of slaves to this country could not be stopped prior to 1808. Now, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. And in the Constitution, there's also this necessary and proper or elastic clause, which allows Congress to make laws that might not specifically be mentioned in the Constitution. This increases the power of Congress. This is going to set off debates in the coming years and decades about who is supreme, the federal government or states. And that answer will be the federal government. So the people debate ratification. The Constitution would take effect when 9 out of 13 states ratified it. It's not the 13 out of 13 that the articles needed to amend. There are 2 groups that emerged. The Federalists, these are people who favored ratification or favored the strong central government. And the Anti-Federalists are those that were weary of ratification. So then the Anti-Federalists feared this centralized power. They were afraid that this government could be too much like the one they just broke away from in Great Britain. And they didn't like that the federal government's power was increased at the state's expense. They also criticized that there was a lack of Bill of Rights, that there were no protections from the federal government. So the Federalists respond. They issue a series of 85 articles in what's known as the Federalist Papers. These are written by John Jay, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton. And the purpose of these was to promote the ratification of the Constitution. And Federalist Paper number 10 in particular discusses what are called factions. James Madison talks about that. I have a video in the description below if you want to check that out. So the Constitution is finally ratified, and typically people in the backcountry were anti-federalists and Easterners tended to be federalists. And it's only with the promise of the addition of the Bill of Rights that many anti-federalists jumped on board and ratified the Constitution. So let's do a quick recap for this chapter. The Battle of Saratoga was a turning point in the war. The French get involved. Foreign assistance was incredibly important to the war effort from Spain, Holland, and France. Women, natives, and African Americans did not gain rights after the Revolutionary War. Shays' Rebellion had a huge impact on the Constitution because many people realized the Articles of Confederation was too weak. And know the Articles of Confederation, there are positives and negatives. Positives being the Northwest Land Ordinance. Negatives being there was a weak central government they could not tax. Again, know the Northwest Land Ordinance. Know that land was sold to raise money. The territories could apply to be states when they reached 60,000 people as well. Definitely, when you're talking about the Constitution, must be familiar with the New Jersey and Virginia plans, as well as the Great and 3/5 Compromises. And know the difference between Federalists and Anti-Federalists and what their goals were regarding the Constitution. Alright guys, thank you very much for watching. That is Chapter 6 for you. If you have not already, please subscribe to my channel. If you found this video helpful, please press the like button and also share this with anybody else that you think would benefit from this. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the section below. I appreciate you guys watching and have a good day.